We're finally done for the day. It was sure one hell of a time, huh? Yeah, you said it. I had fun, but it's getting late, you know? The day is done. Where should I take you? Home? Nah, I really want to stay at your house. Cyberpunk 2077 is special in more ways than one. Both in its flaws and in its virtues, it's a game I have quite a bit of opinions on, which is why I'll be breaking this up into two parts. And I'll warn you up front, part 1 is going to be way more negative than part 2. Mostly because part 1 will be dedicated entirely to the gameplay and mechanics, whereas part 2 will focus almost exclusively on the story, which is undoubtedly the best part of this game. I'm not going to delve too much into every little change from when the game was launched, partially because I only beat it like twice back then and I don't remember it that well, and partially because I don't have any of my own footage because I wasn't making YouTube videos back then. And also, frankly, the changes they did make didn't really do much to improve the game outside of performance. Cyberpunk 2077 was released in December of 2020, 4 fucking years already, Jesus Christ. And the response was...
Sucks ass. I can't even... Are you started a rising? Are you crying?
Yeah, people were mad. Mostly because the game, didn't fucking work. Now, if I'm being completely honest, the performance issues and bugs didn't really get to me all that much. Maybe I just got lucky, or maybe video game bugs don't happen to you if you've recently taken a life. But whatever the case, I didn't have to deal with it all that much, although that isn't to say it didn't happen at all. For me, Cyberpunk's unfinished state was certainly unforgivable, but it wasn't what kept it from being a great game. In my eyes, Cyberpunk was, and still is, a fucking mess, the video game equivalent of eating your top 10 favorite foods all at once. It's a game full of ideas and concepts, and it's also full of shit. And I will be your guide on this journey. A journey through Night City, a journey through shallow design, a journey through pointless beauty, and a journey through the amazing story that was wasted on this game. Just as the people writing for Kotaku are technically journalists, Cyberpunk 2077 is technically an RPG. By this I mean that, well, by definition, the game would definitely be classified as an RPG. It doesn't really understand what an RPG is supposed to be. Role-playing game. No, not like that. The Bethesda Fallout games are a lot of things. I should probably make videos about 3 in New Vegas specifically, but what's important is that they understand what an RPG is supposed to be. A good RPG lets you A, build your character so that you can use whatever playstyle you like, and B, make story decisions and interact with other characters to allow you to act out what kind of a person you want your character to be. And I think both Fallout 3 and Fallout New Vegas do an excellent job of this, even if they have plenty of other issues. In Fallout 3, if you want to be the one guy who's overall accepting of ghouls, or if you want to be disgusted with them like most other people, the game lets you make that choice. In New Vegas, if you want to respect fallen soldiers and the people that they leave behind, or if you want to tell the sibling of a dead soldier that he's a bitch and his brother was too, it's a choice the game gives you. Cyberpunk doesn't really do this, and it bothers me. Your character, V, is not defined by you. V is defined by CD Projekt Red. Sarcastic and witty. Wants to be the best. Not afraid of a little brute force, and deep down, a good person. That's who V is, and while I don't think V is poorly written by any means, the fact that you don't get to choose who you are in an RPG is kind of a problem. That's like watching a movie in audio only, or having sex without another man present. Like, what are you even doing? Why are you there? The other problem with this is that it can result in certain dialogue options feeling out of character, which is expected for an RPG, but normally certain dialogue feels out of character because you decided that it was. You got to choose how your character acts towards others, and because of that, certain options feeling wrong to you just made having options that felt right to you all the more satisfying. Instead, in Cyberpunk, you're just kinda left wondering, what the fuck, I don't think V would ever say that, instead of, nah, fuck you bitch, my character is me and I'm a goddamn menace to society. The other problem with Cyberpunk's role-playing is the fact that most of the quote-unquote options you have in the game are meaningless. Off the top of my head, I can think of 2 choices that actually have an impact on the broader story, and that's who you're gonna bang and that fateful night on the roof where you decide what ending you want to go for. I'm sure there are a couple others, if that, but they are few and far between. For example, in the first act, which plays out exactly the same no matter what you do by the way, your client is a woman named Evelyn Parker. There are a few different approaches you can take with her in terms of dialogue, and by a few different approaches, I mostly just mean you can either be nice or be an asshole, which is true for most of the game, by the way. She'll even try to pull one over on your middleman, Dexter Deshawn, and you can give her your answer as well as choose whether or not to tell Dex about it. Now this seems pretty preem, right? Setting up a web of honesty and betrayal, it forces you to think about how your choice might impact your relationships with both characters. However, it doesn't fucking matter. Dexter Deshawn dies after betraying you, and Evelyn eventually becomes an objective to rescue in Judy's questline. Once Judy calls you again, she, you know... I do plan on bringing this mission up in part 2, I swear I'm not some cold heartless bastard, but for the purposes of this argument, which is the only thing that matters, this doesn't do the game any favors in terms of role-playing. To make a good RPG is not just to present the player with options, it's to make those options mean something. They have to have consequences or else the choices become meaningless. And don't even get me started on the fucking life paths, are you serious? It changes your backstory, which is to say the first 15 minutes of the game, and it occasionally gives you an extra dialogue option based on your background. However, much like the majority of things in this game, it's essentially meaningless because picking these options doesn't ever alter the course of the conversation, much less the rest of the game. You'll be talking with some shit-ass in a suit and he'll bring up Arasaka, and your corpo background will give you a dialogue option where you say, yeah, I work for them, fuck Arasaka, and the dickweed you're talking to is like, yeah, Choom, Arasaka can go fuck a cactus, and then the conversation defaults back to the dialogue resulting from the previously existing choices, which, need I remind you, also usually don't matter. So why? If you aren't gonna let people define who V is, and you aren't going to imbue the vast majority of the dialogue in the game with consequences, then why is it there at all? Not the dialogue, obviously. Well, that'd be awkward.
Get the fuck away! I'm tired of seeing you!
But why give people the options? Are you trying to fool players into thinking they're making important choices in the game? Because honestly, I think that's exactly what CDPR is doing. Why is this here? Just like Ubisoft makes video games, Cyberpunk has a combat system. That's right, it does indeed exist in the game. Combat against capitalism. Cyberpunk's combat is, to put it nicely, underwhelming. It has a pretty good variety of weapons, ranging from guns to swords to cybernetic enhancements. However, it's nothing special. The weapons have nice sounds and animations, but both the gun and melee options still somehow manage to feel low impact and shockingly uninspired. The base combat isn't horrendous by any means, but it also doesn't do anything to set itself apart or make itself interesting. This isn't helped by the fact that the enemies aren't very fun to fight either. They tend to be a bit bullet spongy, sometimes very bullet spongy to the point where you're dumping 2 mags just to kill one basic bitch. Not to mention that they aren't particularly dynamic or reactive. Sure, the guys with guns will take cover and the guys with blades will sometimes charge at you, but most of the time they just sit in one place and take their medicine like Stephen Hawking. You can utilize the net running system in combat, and it's fucking boring. You look at an enemy, decide whether or not you want to take their vision away, make them short circuit, or show them one of my YouTube videos, and then it just happens. All of these basically accomplish the same thing, distracting the bad guy long enough for you to dump enough bullets in them to kill a goddamn elephant. I mean, I never use the optics hack just because it doesn't do any damage and it's barely cheaper. This would be useful if you were trying to stealth around the enemies, but what are you, some kind of pussy? Now, there are ways to make the combat system more interesting, notably the augmentation system. You can go to various Ripper docks around the city and have different enhancements installed. And I won't lie, shit like the Sandevistan, or however the fuck you're supposed to pronounce it, which can slow time to a varying degree depending on how many eddies you want to dump into it, does make the game more interesting, in that it turns the combat from you running around blasting away at uninterested smooth-brain drones into you running around and blasting away at uninterested smooth-brain drones in slow motion. Oh, and don't even get me started on the slogfest that is this game's boss fights. This shit is the video game equivalent of soaking. And even with the enhancements, the core issue of this game's combat being mid as hell isn't solved. I shouldn't have to go out of my way to force a game's gameplay to be fun and interesting. It should be at least the former on its own. When I play a game like Elden Ring, Sekiro, or even Halo Reach, I don't really have to go out of my way to make their combat systems enjoyable. Sure, in Elden Ring there are ways to make the game more fun depending on your playstyle, but the core combat system is strong enough to stand on its own. It doesn't need my help just to be fun. Not to mention that once the gun smoke clears, you have to rifle through your enemies' inventories and make sure you aren't flooding yourself with crafting materials, and oh wait, crafting. Cyberpunk 2077 has a crafting system. And this is kind of anecdotal, but I know quite a few people who have played this game, and when I asked them about it, not one of them used the crafting system in any meaningful way. It's honestly kind of baffling that the crafting was even included in the final game, because anyone who even played through Act 1 of the main story would realize how fucking useless this thing is. I do more crafting in real life than I do in Cyberpunk, and even if it was in any way useful, which it isn't, on top of level points, skill trees, the augmentation system, and the combat loot fest you're already dealing with, crafting shit is just too much. You'd be overwhelmed with bullshit you had to manage on top of everything else, and why is this here? Much like Amazon has an HR department, Cyberpunk has an open world, the world of Night City, and goddamn, it is one of the best looking open worlds I've ever seen. The neon lights in the sky, the mixture of cars and streets and corpo ships in the fucking sky, fucking Skid Row and Jig Street, this truly seems like a genuine city. Upon first glance, Night City looks so alive. It's incredibly alluring. It makes you think about what you could stumble into. What secrets does this city hold? What if I just pick a spot and see what I find? Well, I'll tell you what's gonna happen. If there ain't a marker of some sort there, there's nothing there, bitch. Yeah, this is how I imagine this going down in the studio. Sweet, looks like I've finally finished the world, and not to be biased, but I think it's a beaut. It really is, Tim. Our players will experience the amazing skyline and tense atmosphere that our vision of Night City will create. It was worth grinding the development team into the dirt for this magnum opus of a play space. I can go home and see my wife. Jim, don't we still have to add discoveries to get the players, a reason to explore this massive world we shaved 10 years off our lives to make? The beauty of Night City is, unfortunately, skin deep. While it appears to be a truly alive and complex landscape, that's all it is. Appearances. There are things to do in Night City. Fixer missions, which usually involve the complex and game-changing task of killing fuckers. Not to say every side quest is that boring, but the vast majority of them are some variant of shooting up a Walmart, and you aren't really discovering them. In Fallout 3, I really need to make a video about this game, the first place you'll generally end up is the city of Megaton. One of the residents there, Lucy West, will give you a mission to deliver a letter to her family and make sure they're, alive. This is Fallout. On your way there, you may just stumble upon a fortified cluster of homes called Big Town. They're going through a bit of a crisis as super mutants have been kidnapping their citizens, and they don't have many people to begin with. You can get drawn into an intense journey to rescue their taken members that will take you across the wasteland, culminating in helping the residents fend off one final push by their super mutant aggressors. There's plenty to find, and the residents are interesting and useful to talk to. One of them even wants to build you a shrine, and she's down to fuck if you play your cards right. And if you do indulge her dialogue a bit, you'll even get material rewards for your, effort. All of that is something you stumble into on accident while on a completely unrelated mission or just exploring. I have a lot of issues with Bethesda's games, but it is undeniable that they are the masters of creating interesting worlds, and their exploration has always been top-notch. Except with Starfield, apparently. Granted, not every open world encounter is that deep. It can be pretty simple sometimes, and Big Town is probably one of the better examples from Fallout 3. But the knowledge that if you explore, you can stumble into things like that is what drives player curiosity, combined with the alluring and interesting aesthetic of the game world. Night City has the allure and aesthetic part of that, but the problem comes once you realize there's nothing waiting for you if you decide to explore. Once that sinks in, and believe me, it happens pretty quickly, the landscape of Night City becomes nothing more than an unnecessary buffer between you and the story missions. A very awe-inspiring buffer to be sure, but a buffer nonetheless. I don't get it. This is like buying a sex doll that doesn't have any genitals. It looks great, it looks like something you'd want to explore, but there's nothing to explore. There's no reward, no incentive, and I see this as a massive waste. And it's huge! Why bother making this place so beautiful and detailed if you aren't gonna add any substance that does that justice? Why make it this fucking big and then leave out the reason big worlds are made in games in the first place? Why is this here? When I look at any aspect of Cyberpunk's design, I find myself asking, why is this here? Interactive dialogue usually serves to add to player choices in an RPG, but those choices are made irrelevant when they lack proper consequences. A massive and beautiful open world usually serves to give the game a sense of wonder and interesting exploration, but that becomes impossible if there's nothing to find. The combat, well, obviously that has to be there, but the cyber augment system should serve to make the combat more fun and interesting. It can't be the only thing that gives it entertainment in the first place. And the crafting system, why in the fuck is this here? I'm seriously asking. Cyberpunk 2077 is a game that has it all, and while that sounds attractive in theory, it's actually quite problematic. Trying to implement as much bullshit as possible just because you want to make your game big as fuck is gonna lead to a lack of focus, which is Cyberpunk's biggest problem. It was never about the bugs. Well, okay, the bugs were a part of it, but Cyberpunk prevented itself from being a truly great game from the beginning by refusing to focus on a core mechanic. I've compared this game to Fallout 3 a couple times in this video. Cyberpunk 2077 is an overall stronger game than Fallout 3, especially now that it's fixed. Cyberpunk's combat is underwhelming. Fallout 3's combat makes me want to hurt myself. Cyberpunk is, both artistically and graphically, a gorgeous game with smooth controls and good camera movements. Fallout 3 looks and plays like it was coded in Replit. Fallout 3 crashes every 2 hours on PC. It has so many goddamn problems, but if you ask me which game I prefer, it's not even close. I'll play Fallout 3 10 times more than Cyberpunk 2077 for the simple reason that it's a game with a clear focus and a goal that I would say it accomplished. It's a game that knows what the fuck it is, and it at least has 1 or 2 areas it excels in. Cyberpunk does everything it possibly can mechanically, but it doesn't do any of it well or even decent. Everything in this damn game is so half-assed. Like the entire scope of this game was just the higher-ups at CDPR telling the development team, this game's gotta have it all. A game can be unpolished, buggy as hell, and unable to just fucking run properly, but if it has that focus, that clear idea of what it wants to be, it can accomplish quite a bit, more than might seem possible on the surface. A game that tries to do everything can't accomplish anything. I do hope that with the second Cyberpunk game on the horizon, CDPR has learned their lesson. I hope next time they decide what exactly Cyberpunk is, because there is potential here. I can see the promise of a Night City where you can truly become whatever you want to be. A night city where you want to see what there is to discover. A night city where you simply get to go fucking goblin mode on your enemies, just don't try to make it all of those things at once. If you listen to Comfortably Numb, November Rain, and Love Bites, three of the greatest, well, my favorite, songs ever made, at the same time, you will get nothing out of it as they drown each other out. A beautiful disaster is still a disaster. Part 2 will be out soon. Thank you for watching.